Welcome to Old Path Ministries in our study through the book of 1 Samuel. We get to chapter 20 today, and there's more in these chapters than I can get through at one point or one time. And really, this is kind of a portion of the text where things go from bad to worse, and they really never recover as far as David and Saul. What we're going to read, actually, we'll get through probably these three chapters, 20, 21, and 22, but just know that even after chapter 22, there's going to be a continuation of all of this, because this is where Saul seeks to arrest and kill David. There is Jonathan's intervention. There's all the intrigue of David trying to escape. What we have here really, in just chapter 20 alone, there's a lot of detail, a lot of words that are here, but it could very easily be, kind of summarized this quickly. And this again goes to the part of Scripture that it is. It's giving us a great deal of detail about the events, but they could just very easily be put together in a few simple thoughts. Saul wanted to kill David. David knew about it, says it to Jonathan. Jonathan's kind of incredulous about the whole thing because Saul conceals it. Why? Because Saul knows that David and Jonathan are close, and so he doesn't disclose what he wants to do. So they come up with a way of Jonathan ascertaining whether or not what David believes is true. And so they come up with a pretty elaborate way of determining that. Well, again, you could boil it down even from that. David tells Jonathan, your dad wants to kill me. Jonathan doesn't believe him, but they set up a way to kind of bring out what Saul's intention are. And so that really kind of goes right to the heart of it. It helps us a few different ways in the recognition that Saul by this time is really kind of overtaken by madness, and the irrational things that he is doing are going to plague the rest of his time while he's alive. And when you really stop to think about how kind of tragic this whole thing is, he's in this condition really because of his own actions and because of who he is. There shouldn't be a reason why he wasn't able to be the king that was put in place. Had he honored the things of God, none of this would have taken place. So by this time, he's heard more than once directly from Samuel, who's no longer communicating with him. Samuel has told him twice that you're no longer going to be the king. God has no long-term plans for you. So, of course, this creates all kinds of panic and emotion. And, of course, it's really focused more at David than anyone else. His jealousy of David is obvious. So, again, the question is, how much of this is the devil really trying to thwart the work of God through David by the actions of Saul? You can speculate on a lot of that stuff. Well, this genuinely is a case study in paranoia, in just not being in touch mentally with just your faculties. And it shows you how quickly people can be driven to just insane actions because of petty jealousy. And that's really what ends up taking place here. So, again, this is going to plague David. He has done nothing to warrant this. He's only done those things that Saul has asked of him. And it is because of the successes, because of God being upon him, his presence being upon David and guiding him and giving him victory, that it's drawn attention to David. And Saul's kind of made the matters worse by his turning his attention to David to do him harm. So what we're going to read is just chapters that go along kind of developing that. And it'll help us to understand a little bit behind why Saul is so incredibly driven to rid himself of David and anyone that he sees as a conspirator. So this desire for power is something that plagues humanity, and it always has. It happens to this day. The irrational things that people will do for the sake of power. And so here we see it in Saul to the point where he's willing to have even godly men put to death, these priests that we'll see in chapter 22. He has a wholesale slaughter of them, all because he believes that they've helped David in this conspiracy. It's just madness. It's crazy what Saul does here. Again, remembering this, they were warned from the beginning that this idea of a king would be a horrible situation. And what Samuel says about the king has immediate, direct fulfillment in the person of Saul, but it's really going to be a repetition of most all of the kings that would ever serve, certainly all of them in the northern tribes, Israel, and then in the southern tribes, Judah. There would be some good kings there, but many of them, actually the majority of them, were pretty awful. So everything that Samuel had said was kind of the opposite of what David was. Everything that Samuel warned in chapter 8 is exactly what Saul is, and so many after Saul. This idea of one person governing the people and the wickedness that ensues from that, if that is not a godly man, the kind of terror that they will unleash on the people is just frightening. Well, again, we're going to see that. This is the character of Saul. It's gone into hyper motion here of the insane things that he does. And insane to me is a really good word for this. They're totally irrational. They are absolutely insane to the point of murder. Well, chapter 20, let's turn there and let's have a word of prayer. Father, as we come before you this day, and as we open your word, we pray that as we study much of this history, we realize that this is the history of your people Israel. And it is good for us to know this, and there are some times when we can take the application from these passages. What could we learn from it in these distant years from the events and how long ago all of this took place? We would ask, Lord, that you would give us understanding as we take a look at these things, and that you would bless our time in your word by your Spirit. We ask this in Jesus' name. All right. Right off the bat, we're going to see here, this is one of those things where people will question, isn't what they've done here between David and Jonathan, isn't this just a ruse? Aren't they just lying about all of this stuff? And you could say, absolutely. God doesn't condone it. God doesn't tell him to do this. This is what they come up with. But it is to save David's life as they see it. And they choose a course that, again, goes against what should be. You don't give false witness about things. You don't give false information. And nowhere does it say that God accepts it if we just have a righteous cause. Well, we're going to see David does it more than once in these chapters, that he gives information that is not truthful. And, of course, we can, again, look at the motivations as to why. Why does he do what he does? And is there justification? Well, according to David, there certainly would be. He's trying to save his own life. Well, in these few verses, we get that understanding. Chapter 20, verse 1 says this. So David fled from Naioth in Ramah, and he went out and he said to Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity, and what is the sin before your father that he seeks to kill me," or he seeks my life? So Jonathan said to him, "By no means, you shall not die. Indeed, my father will do nothing, either great or small, without first telling me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." So this kind of sets up the whole thing. David is sure of it. Your father wants me dead. Jonathan says, he wouldn't conceal something like that from me. Of course not. What you're saying isn't accurate. You're just imagining it as what it must be. He's not accusing David of lying. It's just, I think you're mistaken because he hasn't said anything like that to me. Well, that gives us the setup. That helps us in our understanding of what goes on from this point forward. So David took an oath again. And he said, "Your father certainly knows that I have found favor in your eyes, and he has said, 'Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved.' But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." And so Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you desire, I will do for you." All right, so again, David lays out and says, basically, it's just concealed from you. I'm telling you, your father wants me dead. Jonathan says, "Okay, so what do you plan on doing? What do you want to do? You tell me what you want to do. Let's do this. Let's find out what's going on." Well, David said to Jonathan, "Indeed, tomorrow is the new moon. It's the beginning of the lunar month." And so they would gather together for a feast. It would be a consecrated thing because there's this matter of cleanness and uncleanness. And so it's not just they're getting together to eat something. It was an observance. And so David says to Jonathan, "Indeed, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king and eat. But let me go, that I may hide in the field until the third day at the evening. That would be the end of the feast. And so when your father misses me, or if your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked permission of me that he might run over to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all of his family. And so this is the ruse. This is David's saying this is a lie. He's not saying it that way, but it is. In essence, it is. What he's telling Jonathan to say to the father is, this is not true, but let's set this up because it will set Saul up and it will reveal his intention. So he says, if your father misses me at all, verse 6, David earnestly asked permission of me. In verse 7, now if he says, it is well, your servant will be safe. But if he is very angry, be sure that evil is determined by him. Therefore, you will deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. Nevertheless, if there is iniquity in me, kill me yourself. For why should you bring me to your father? And so David's basically saying, look, if there's something that I've done that warrants your father putting me to death, let's not even bother with that. You show me what I've done wrong, and I'll yield myself up to you. You kill me yourself. Jonathan said, far be it from me, or from you rather, verse 9, for if I knew certainly that evil was determined by my father to come upon you, then I would not tell you. Seriously, are you really believing this? You don't think I would tell you? Well, David said to Jonathan, who will tell me? Or what if your father answers you roughly? And so Jonathan said to David, come, let us go into the field. So both of them went out into the field. And then Jonathan said to David, the Lord God of Israel is witness. When I have sounded out my father sometime tomorrow or the third day, and indeed there is good toward David, and I do not send to you and tell you, may the Lord do so much more to Jonathan. But if it pleases my father to do you evil, then I will report it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety, and the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. And so you shall not only show me the kindness of the Lord while I still live, that I may not die, but you shall not cut off your kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord has cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. And so Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, let the Lord require it of the hand of David's enemies. Okay, so a lot of words there, and basically it's just this. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to figure out what's going on with my father's house. Now, if basically the wager is this, let's make a covenant here. If my father wishes you ill, then I'm going to let you know. And if that's the case, then don't hold it to my account for what he's done. Be merciful towards me. And, obviously David wouldn't do anything like that anyway. He loves Jonathan. There's a friendship, a deep brotherhood, a love that they have for one another. So the agreement is, let's find out where my father is in this whole thing. And if it is as you say, remember me for the kindness that I've shown towards you. And of course, David would have certainly been willing to do that, clearly. So Jonathan again caused David to vow, because he loved him, for he loved him as his own soul. So Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, because your seat will be empty. And when you have stayed for 3 days, then go down quickly to come to the place where you hid on the day of the deed, and remain by the stone of Ezel. Now, nobody knows where this is, but it's just kind of a marker. It's something that they would recognize. When they see it along the road, it's a way of recognition. So he says, let me go do this feast with my dad and wait for 3 days and then come back down and see me. Well, in verse 20, and so what I will do is shoot 3 arrows to the side as I shot at the target, and there I will send a lad saying, now go and find the arrows. If I expressly say to the lad, look, the arrows are on this side of you, then get them and come, and then as the Lord lives, there is safety for you and no harm. But if I say to the young man, look, the arrows are behind you, go your way, for the Lord has sent you away, and as the matter which you and I have spoken, of. Indeed, the Lord be between you and me forever. All right, so very simply, he's going to go out of the field. This would be after the feast is kind of over, and he's been able to determine what's going on with Saul. So it'll be something that David is able to see from a distance. He doesn't have to reveal himself. And Jonathan's going to go out and shoot targets, right? So he's going to miss intentionally, and then he's going to send somebody to retrieve the arrows. If they're all bunched up kind of close, that's great. If he goes looking for the arrow that was shot and he says, no, you've got to go further, it's out there further, then David's going to go, that's the sign, that's the signal, and I'm going to go and get out of here because Saul seeks his life. All right, so that's the agreement, that's the wager. Here's what we do. Shouldn't say the wager. That's the agreement. And this is how you will know, David. I'm going to find out what it is, and when you see me on that third day with the arrows and all of that, you'll know by how I give instruction to retrieve them. Okay, now back to what takes place at the actual feast. Now, David hid in the field, and when the new moon had come, the king sat down to eat the feast. Now the king sat on his seat, as at other times, on a seat by the wall, and Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, something has happened to him. He is unclean. Surely he is unclean. Now, he doesn't say this out loud, kind of keeps it to himself. He's figuring something that David must have encountered along the way when he was doing the things that he was doing has made him ceremonially unclean. So he couldn't partake of a feast of the new moon because that would make him, if he's in an unclean state, it's just you don't partake of things that are consecrated to the Lord in an unclean state. So it doesn't seem anything out of the ordinary. David is just not here. There must be a reason for it. He's ceremonially unclean. That's his thinking through this. So, verse 27, and it happened the next day, the second day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, why has the son of Jesse not come to eat either yesterday or today? So Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked permission of me to go to Bethlehem. And he said, please let me go, for our family has a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. And now, if I have found favor in your eyes, please let me get away to see my brothers. Therefore, he has not come to the king's table. Okay, everything that they had already agreed upon. So here, Saul confronts Jonathan. Where is he? It's day 2. Oh, Jonathan's whole thing is, well, he came to me and asked, since his family's doing something in Bethlehem that they offer a sacrifice, he asked if he could be there, and I told him, sure, you can go ahead and go. If we were able to see this on video, which of course, I don't know if you know this, but they didn't have video back then. But if we had the actual ability to see what had taken place, my guess is that Jonathan would have said it very matter-of-factly. Oh, no big deal. He just asked. And so I told him it's fine for him to go. Look at Saul's reaction to it. It's pretty interesting. So Saul then, his anger was aroused against Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse over your own shame, or to your own shame and the shame of your mother's nakedness? Now, basically, this is a way of insulting him. You son of this faithless, horrible woman. Of course, it's not a reflection on the woman. It's as though you are. It's a way of shaming him as though he comes from some illegitimate source. And he says, your shame is also brought upon your actual mother who birthed you, her nakedness. And so this is a way of Saul doing about as coarse of a way of rebuking his own son, and just using what would be seen as just, these are fighting words here. He's insulting his own mother and calling him some pretty derogatory terms. It just shows how unbalanced Saul actually is. It's pretty horrible. So, verse 31, for as long as the son of Jesse lives upon this earth, you shall not be established, nor your kingdom. Now therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. So here's Saul trying to appeal to Jonathan's lust for power. And basically Saul says to him, look, as long as David's alive, he's a threat to the throne. And once I'm gone, it's going to be yours. He's a threat to your kingdom going forward. He appeals to this coarse, base kind of appeal to Jonathan, as though Jonathan wants power anything like his father. Just sick. So Jonathan answered Saul, his father, and said to him, "Why should he be killed? What has he done?" Then Saul cast a spear at him to kill him, by which Jonathan knew that it was determined by his father to kill David, because he had seen him do the same thing towards David. Now think about this. If you're Jonathan, you really didn't believe David and the things that he had said. Now, in Saul's rage, he does the same thing that he had done to David, throws a spear at him. And so when Jonathan sees the rage of his father and the threats that have been made, and then he goes, because Jonathan just goes, "I don't understand this. Why are you so angry at him? Why do you want him dead? What has he done to you?" And then his father treats him as he has treated David in times past and makes an attempt on his life. That's all that Jonathan needs to see. Things have gone really, really wrong. Well, so Jonathan arose from there in fierce anger, ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had treated him shamefully. Now that's more directed towards David. And of course, by extension, it had happened to Jonathan as well. But Jonathan, the son of Saul, looks at his father and says, "What a shameful thing this man has done." He basically sees the illness of this man and his own madness and his own insanity, that he would not only want David killed, but he also would really take out after his own son and could very easily have killed him. Well, so it was in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field at the time appointed with David, and a little lad was with him. So he said to the lad, "Now run, find the arrows which I shot." And as the lad ran, he shot another arrow behind him. And when the lad had come to the place where the arrow was, and Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried out after the lad and said, "Is not the arrow behind you or beyond you? It's further." And Jonathan cried out after the lad, "Make haste, hurry, do not delay." So Jonathan's lad gathered up the arrows, and he came back to his master. But the lad did not know anything, only Jonathan and David knew of the matter. So Jonathan gave his weapon to the lad and said to him, "Go and carry them to the city." Well, so this gets the person who retrieved it, gets him out of the way. So really what's left is just Jonathan alone. And so now he's able to meet with David, and they are able to kind of come to a conclusion of this whole thing. Well, as soon as the lad had gone, David arose from his place towards the south, fell on his face to the ground, and bowed down 3 times. And they kissed one another, and they wept together, and David more so. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, since we have both sworn in the name of the Lord, saying, 'May the Lord be between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" And so he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. Now think of this. Jonathan wants to make sure that his pact is very much intact with David. And if anything, Jonathan is in the place of power here. He could very easily have seized David at this point if that's what he had intended to do. But of course, that's not the intention at all. And so, isn't this an interesting thing? The family ties that Jonathan would have with his father, a son of Benjamin, versus David, a son of Judah, their bond as friends and brothers and the love they had for one another was greater than family. And so Jonathan sees his father as irrational and crazy and wants nothing to do with it, and sees David as, "Look, you were right. My dad's nuts. And he's wanted to try to kill you." In fact, if they had exchanged that much information, he could have said, "He tried to kill me like he just killed you. You're right. Go in peace. Get to safety." So this sets in motion what we're going to see over the next few chapters, in that David is going to try to preserve his own life, and then the insanity of Saul trying to come after him to kill him. Well, chapter 21 says this. Now, David came to Nob, to Ahimelech, the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid. And when he met David, he said to him, "Why are you alone, and none is with you?" Now, David had some people with him, but it's David by himself coming to see him. He doesn't have the king kind of entourage type thing. Those types of dignitaries, those types of people aren't with him. He clearly has some men with him, but it's not what Ahimelech would expect. Now, what David does is the second time that he has been dishonest in his answer. And again, nowhere does the Bible excuse being untruthful. It is not an untruth that God had told him to say, so it's not a violation on God's part of the law, which says not bearing false witness. David has done this all on his own. And again, if your life is on the line, people will do all kinds of things to preserve their own lives. It doesn't mean that God sanctioned it, but it happens, and God still is going to provide for David. Well, David said to Ahimelech, the priest, the king has ordered me on some business and said to me, do not let anyone know anything about the business on which I send you or what I have commanded you, and I have directed my young men to such and such a place. Now therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, and whatever you can be found. And the priest answered to David and said, there is no common bread on hand, but there is the holy bread, if the young men have at least kept themselves from women. So again, are they clean or are they unclean? Now, what you're going to find just with some detail here, there's the showbread that was always put out every day. Morning by morning it was put out, and it was all the way back to the information that was given in the tabernacle to Moses. And so the priests would see to it that there was bread put on the table. It's what they would call showbread sometimes, but it's holy, it's consecrated bread. But every day it would be changed out. What was supposed to happen with that bread is every day when the new loaves were put out, the old ones were to be taken and then burned. Now, Jesus talks about this in the Gospels, and he uses it as a way of saying that there are times out of necessity or because there is a greater good that, or a greater authority, even if you will, than what we see in the law. And he uses this episode about David. Did not David eat the showbread? And it was an expected thing that they could not do what the law had required. Remember, they're not taking fresh loaves here. They're taking the previous day's loaves before they were burned up, and they were able to be used because the need was great. So Jesus is able to use that as an example of the times when following the absolute letter of the law can in itself be a problem against the law. And so Jesus proving that he was the Lord of the Sabbath is why he uses this, what we're reading right here, as the example. Now, David answered the priest in verse 5, said to him, truly, women have been kept from us for about 3 days since I came out. And the vessels of the young men are holy, the things, their bags, there's nothing that's unclean in them, and nothing has touched any of us that's unclean. And so the bread is in effect to us common, even though it was consecrated in the vessel this day. So it's yesterday's bread, and the other ones are coming out, but it is then common since it's been replaced. Now, certain men, so in verse 6, so the priest gave him the showbread, the holy bread, and there was no bread there, but the showbread which had been taken from before the Lord in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away. So there's the change out of the bread on that day. So a certain man from the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg. He was an Edomite. Now, interesting. Well, let's just read the rest. He was the chief of the herdsmen who belonged to Saul. Now, the fact that he's an Edomite means that he's not of the children of Israel. Detained by the Lord may be a few different things. Was he in the process of becoming a proselyte? Possibly. Had he taken some kind of a vow before the Lord and he had to stay there? But that detention means there was something that required him to stay where he was for a particular amount of time. This guy is going to create a real problem down the road, and David is going to have remorse that he didn't do something about it. David knew that he was there, though. So there was a certain man. Now David said to Ahimelech, is there not here on hand a spear or a sword? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapon with me, because the king's business required haste. So the priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you have killed in the valley of Elah, there it is, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. And if you will take that, then take it. For there is no other except for that one. And David said, There is none like it. Let me have it, or give it to me. So again, Ahimelech is just not in any way really on to what's going on here. It would be a weird thing that David, this commander, this mighty man, this man of valor, didn't at least have some kind of personal weapon on him, nor did any of his men. And so David sees his need for something. So the only thing that's there is what's left of when David killed Goliath. We've got his spear, or his sword rather. Now remember, this man Doeg has listened and watched and seen all of this. Now there's going to be the report that's going to come back. We'll get to that in the next chapter. So David arose, and he fled that day from before Saul, and he went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, Is this not David, the king of the land? And did they not sing of him to one another in dances, saying, Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Now, interesting that they refer to him the king of the land. Now, is that because word had gotten to them that he was going to be a changed, he's going to be the replacement king? Well, if they knew it, Saul didn't seem to know it, though he had his suspicions and certainly his jealousy. He probably had pieced it all together. But, again, these guys basically see David as this place that he's much more the leader of Israel than Saul is at this point anyway. And it may very well be that that's their way of saying whether he carries the title as king like Saul has, or if it's obvious this is the guy that God has chosen. I mean, look at the songs that they sing about him, the one who has slain his tens of thousands, right? So David took these words to heart, and he was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And so he changed his behavior before them, pretending madness in their hands, scratched on the doors of the gate, and let the saliva fall down from his beard. And then Achish said to his servants, Look, you see that the man is insane. Now why have you brought him to me? Have I need of a madman, that you had brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? Well, so David, in his haste to get away from Saul, runs to the city of Gad, and this is the area of the Philistines. So how nutty would it be that you would go there, and David sees himself as like, okay, they see who I am, and I've got to find some way to get them to keep from looking at me in any kind of a suspicious way. The first thing he goes, I'll make them think that I'm crazy. So scratching at the doors and acting insane, letting drool fall from his beard. I mean, he looks like a wild man, a crazy man. So he gets the desired effect from the king of Gad there. And basically the guy says, what do I need with another crazy person? Why would I let him into my house? So not accepted. Good for David, because now he's able to get to a place that would be much more secure. So David departed from there. He escaped to the cave at Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard of it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. And there were about 400 men with him. So David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and then he said to the king of Moab, Please let my father, my mother come here with you until I know what God will do for me. And so he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him in the time of David, that he was, and that was his stronghold, or that was the stronghold. Now the prophet Gad said to David, Do not stay in the stronghold, but depart and go to the land of Judah. And so David departed and went into the forest of Hereth. So David goes from Gad, which would be much more towards the Mediterranean coast. It's very close to there. Instead, he goes all the way to the other side, and this would be to the south and to the east of what is the Dead Sea. That's the area. So he's kind of all over the place. Now he's looking for a place to not only be secure for him, but also for his family and these other people. Now remember, what you basically have is a collection of people that for a variety of reasons left from the area where Saul had his influence, and now they've tried to get out of the reach of him. So that gives you kind of an idea of how far things have gone. In verse 6, now Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered. Now Saul was staying in Gibeah under a tamarisk tree in Ramah, and with his spear in his hand and his servants standing about him. And then Saul said to his servants who stood by him, hear now, you Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you captains of thousands and of hundreds? All of you who you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there is not one of you who is sorry for me or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me, to lie in wait as it is to this day. So again, look at how he just blows this thing out of proportion. David is not looking to put up some kind of a rivalry against Saul. That's just not how this is going on. And now Saul is looking at all the people around him and says, why haven't you guys done anything about this? And so in a kind of a way, he says, I've given you all kinds of things, and I could give you more, the idea of fields and vineyards and all the rest of that, but none of you came forward and told me about these kind of things. Now David continues to elude me. How is it that none of you have come and reported this? Now, oddly enough, he's assuming that these guys are all in on the plot. They're just as clueless as anyone. Remember, everything that had gone on between David and Jonathan was between David and Jonathan. No one else had been brought into this whole thing, but yet Saul assumes that they have, and now he's trying to hold them accountable. Well, so who comes up? Doeg. Now he's back where, whatever vow that was that he made, or whatever reason he was, quote, detained in front of Ahimelech, that's over with, and now he's there and he's listening to what Saul has said. So he said, so Doeg, the one who was set over the servants of Saul, said, I saw the son of Jesse go to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of the Lord for him. Now, nowhere does it say that. That's this guy adding to the whole thing. Like somehow Ahimelech, the high priest, was in on the whole thing and gave him cover. But remember, David didn't tell him anything. David gave him no details, said, I'm here to do what the king has sent me to do. There was no conspiracy by Ahimelech, none of it. But Doeg adds this bit. He inquired of the Lord, Ahimelech's in on the whole thing. David disclosed the whole thing, seeking what he should do. David did no such thing. So not only is he's put the life of the priest in jeopardy, because he's added to the story and said things that never took place. Well, in verse 10 again, he inquired of the Lord for him, gave him provision, and gave him the sword of Goliath, the Philistine. So two of those three things are correct. Did Abiathar give him the sword and to give him provisions? Yes, he did. Did he give him insight? Well, no, because David gave him no indication. So there was nothing that was true about that part of it. So the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all of his father's house, the priests who were at Nob, and they all came to the king. So Saul said, Hear now, son of Ahitub. He answered, And here I am, my lord. And Saul said to him, Why have you conspired against me, you, the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread with a sword, and you have inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait as it is to this day? Look at, that's all the additional information, none of which is true. He's taken the word of a guy who is, at best, a proselyte from being from Edom, or at worst, he's just some guy who's going through the motions, but he's looking to enrich himself clearly by giving false information. Now, taking that little bit of subterfuge, it's not true. Look at all the things that now Saul has constructed. You have given him consultation, Abiathar. You're showing him what he has to do. Now he can lie in wait and ambush me and kill me, and you're part of the conspiracy. Imagine if you're him. This is the high priest. This is just madness. Again, more typical Saul, it's his madness. I said Abiathar, it's Ahimelech. So Ahimelech answered the king and said, "And who among all your servants is as faithful as David? Who is the king's son-in-law, who goes at your bidding and is honorable in your house? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to any in the house of my father, for your servant knew nothing of all of this, little or much." So, again, the whole thing, it doesn't even get to the point. Remember, at this point, Saul is imagining that the reason that you gave him the sword and that you gave him provisions, it was just loaves of bread for as many people as he had. It was nothing compared to what they would have had need of. And so it was like, I gave him what he had asked for, but as far as inquiring of the Lord and setting a trap for you, far be it. I had nothing to do with that. That wasn't my intention. And again, David wouldn't have given him any kind of information that would have led him to, kind of do any of those types of things. He was kind of in the dark on all of this. Well, so the king said, "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and all of your father's house." And so the king said to the guards who stood about him, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand is also with David, and because they knew that he fled and did not tell me." But the servants of the king would not lift their hands to strike the priests of the Lord. That should have been the first indication. First of all, they realized he's gone completely off the rails. So these people who are directly accountable to the Lord or to the king really kind of see that we're not going to do something like this. You're asking us to kill the priests. These are not wicked men. So these are certainly not people who are conspirators, and we're not going to do it. Well, interesting. Look at what happens from there next. That Saul finally turns the corner from being a man who is convinced of all kinds of horrible conspiracies to now he is going to sanction the wholesale murder of people. Well, the king said to the guards who stood by, "Turn and kill the priests," but they wouldn't do it. So the king said to Doeg, "You turn and you kill the priests." So Doeg the Edomite turned and he struck the priests and killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. That's just a way of saying the priests. So there's one guy. Does he have any help? Who knows? Does he have people with him? Who knows? Priests are defenseless, and so if you don't let them get away, he'd be able to do it easily. And so, he takes out 85 of these people in one day. Well, in short order, actually, probably even less than a day. It's just a way of saying that day, 85 people were dead, and they were the priests. So, verse 19. Also, Nob, the city of the priests, that he struck with the edge of the sword, both men and women, children and nursing infants, oxen, donkeys, and sheep with the edge of the sword. Now, by this time, others must have joined in on this, because there's no way you wipe out an entire town all by yourself. But he was the person that was put in place to do all of this. Now, one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped, and he fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priest. So David said to Abiathar, "I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have caused the death of all of these persons." Well, here David must have thought, I know he was Saul's guy, and I knew that he was going to go back and tell Saul. What David didn't realize is just how completely off the rails crazy Saul had become. And so he just sees himself, I should have done something else about it. I didn't. Those people's blood is on our hands. But notice what David says in verse 23. "Now stay with me and do not fear, for he who seeks my life seeks yours as well. But with me you will be safe." Now, there's still a whole lot more that's going on. And the pursuit of Saul to kill David will continue on for chapters in this, all the way up until the time when Saul's dead. But there's no sense in trying to rush through it all. This just gives us kind of the opening salvo, if you will. And it really, again, it's another one of those tipping points. Saul had his times of just not being rational, to the point where Samuel had to say to him, God's done with you. He begins to be very jealous of David. David continues to excel in the things that he's done, and now Saul sees him as a rival and wants him dead. He makes that very clear, his intentions towards David, but David's really the only one who picks up on it. By this time, Jonathan sees the madness of his father and sends David out. Anyone who is seen as being in any way favorable towards David is now on the radar, to the point, think about this, Saul sanctions the wiping out of everyone of the priestly people and the entire city where they did what they did. It's just again, it's madness, but it shows what happens when jealousy turns into all of these other things. This is what dictators do. They begin to wipe out any remnant of anybody that they feel has crossed them. So again, I say all of this, and in the back of my mind, I'm just thinking about all the craziness happening in our country right now at the beginning of 2021, and the idea of trying to eradicate the memory of anyone that goes against the grain. So such an interesting time in which we live. But what we see here, and it's going to, again, it set the table for what's going to happen in these next few chapters. It's only 2 chapters away from the whole thing that happens at En Gedi. And I'm going to have pictures of En Gedi. We go there on our trips to Israel. And it's an interesting place, and I'll point out some things that I have from the photographs that are very, very interesting. Again, since I'm saying it, a trip to Israel is unlike anything you can possibly imagine, because if you've never been there, you get a chance to see the actual locations where these things took place, many of them. So many of the things that you see in the Bible, you can go to the actual locations where they took place. Whether you're standing in the exact spot or just the general area, it is such a surreal thing to take into account and understand where it is that you stand. So with all that said, if you're ever interested in a trip to Israel, we actually have one planned for April of 2021, depending on all the insanity with COVID. But you can contact us if you're interested in a trip, and we'd love to send you some details. Depending on what the world looks like, 2022 is a good option too. I know some people have expressed an interest, and frankly, I'll take people there every single year if there are enough people to go on the trip. So with all of that said, it is a very interesting time in the history of Israel, transitioning from one king to the next. Let's just remember, from God's perspective, forget the intrigues happening here. Saul is not a legitimate king in God's eyes. David is. Now, God is allowing things to turn out as they have. Basically, he has removed his hand from Saul, and so all of Saul's actions are based upon not God's word and God's will and desire, but rather the insanity of this man who is now king. And we'll see the transition to David clearly as we go through these books, 1st and 2nd Samuel. But it is, again, for us to be reminded how horrible this is turning out. The very first king of Israel is everything that they were warned about and much worse. But again, the king they were told, you don't want a king, and here's the reasons why. He's not a godly man. He will do ungodly things. It's not the kind of government that God wanted, but yet they insisted. So God gave them what they desired. A lot of instruction in that for us. Well, anyhow, we'll pick up next week in this. If you have any questions about any of what I've discussed here today, it's easy to contact us through our website, which is oldpaththeology.net. And there's a place where you can send information or email to us right there on that website, and I'll answer those emails as they come in, and any questions that you might have. So with that, if you're watching on YouTube, hopefully with all the craziness going on, we won't be losing any of this on YouTube, I'm hoping. Anyway, we'll just have to see what the platforms do. And you can subscribe to our channel there. And if not, if ever there is a time when all this information is scrubbed, you can go to our website. And again, that is at oldpaththeology.net. If for some reason we ever lose what we see here, what you're seeing here on YouTube, we will look for another platform to discuss all of these things. So with that, we pray that you enjoy the the time that you spend in the Word and that God reveals things to you. And we pray that you have the time to study on your own and read through His Word. It is a real port in a very stormy world at all times, but especially even now. So with that said, we'll pick up at chapter 23 next week, and we'll see where the Lord takes it from there. God bless you.